You can either give up your room or move out tonight." My father's voice cut through the dinner table like glass shattering against marble. My fork froze halfway to my mouth as his words sank in, leaving a hollow ringing in my ears. My mother didn't even flinch. She just kept slicing her roast as if he hadn't just kicked his own daughter out of her childhood home. Madison, my younger sister, sat beside them with that smug half-smile she always wore when I was the one taking the fall. The silence that followed was worse than the yelling. It was the sound of years of resentment bubbling quietly under the surface. If you're enjoying this, please subscribe and share. Your support keeps the stories coming. I stared at my parents, waiting for one of them to laugh, to tell me it was a bad joke. But when my father slammed his hand on the table and pointed at me, I knew there was no humor in it. "Katie," he said, his tone heavy with authority, "Madison needs space to get her life together. You're barely home anyway. It's time you start acting like an adult." My mother added softly, "You have your own income, sweetheart. Madison just lost her job again. Be reasonable. Be reasonable." That was her favorite phrase whenever I was asked to sacrifice something for Madison's sake. I'd been reasonable when Madison crashed my car in college. I'd been reasonable when she moved back home and took over the guest room. But this time it wasn't about reason, it was about respect. "You're asking me to give up my room so she can have more space to fail again?" I asked quietly. Madison rolled her eyes, picking at her salad. "Don't be so dramatic. It's just a room. Just a room. The same room where I'd stayed up nights building my first website for a client, where I'd hidden my tears after every argument, where I'd dreamed of building something of my own one day." It wasn't just a room. It was the last piece of a home that never really felt like mine. My father leaned back, crossing his arms. "You've always been difficult, Katie. Always making everything about you." His words hit like old wounds reopening. He'd said similar things when I didn't want to quit my job to join his company, when I didn't agree with how they treated me compared to Madison. My mother didn't defend me. She just sighed, like she was tired of the same story repeating. "Maybe a little independence will be good for you." Independence. That word had been my dream and my punishment at the same time. I swallowed hard, pushing my plate away. "Fine," I said. "You want the room? She can have it." My chair scraped loudly against the floor as I stood up. "But don't expect me to come back." My mother's eyes flickered with something. Fear, maybe. But she didn't speak. My father nodded curtly, as if he'd just made a business decision. "We'll pack your things tomorrow." That night, I packed my bags myself. Madison watched from the hallway, her expression somewhere between guilt and satisfaction. "You don't have to be so dramatic," she said again. I zipped my suitcase without replying. For years, I had tried to earn their approval. Every achievement, every job, every milestone was followed by a quiet hope that maybe, just maybe, they'd see me. But love in that house was conditional. I left before sunrise, my car packed with 2 suitcases, a box of files, and the framed photo of me with my first client. Back when my parents didn't even know what I did for a living. The city felt cold that morning, but at least it was mine. I found a tiny apartment downtown, one that smelled faintly of paint and dust, with creaky floors and peeling wallpaper. It wasn't much, but it was freedom. Every morning, I worked from my kitchen table, cold coffee by my side, chasing clients and deadlines. Some nights I'd fall asleep at my laptop, my fingers stiff and my heart heavy, but I kept going. Every rejection pushed me harder. I told myself that if I couldn't have a family that believed in me, I'd build a world that did. Months blurred into each other. My little marketing firm grew from a one-woman hustle into something real. I hired my first employee, a shy intern named Leah who reminded me of myself at 20. Together we worked long nights designing campaigns for small businesses, the kind no one else paid attention to. We made people believe in their dreams because we knew what it felt like when no one believed in ours. Sometimes I'd pass by my parents' house on my way to meetings. The lights would be on, Madison's laughter spilling from the windows. It used to sting, but over time the pain turned into motivation. I wanted to prove that I could make it without them, that I didn't need their praise or pity. That being underestimated was my greatest advantage. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. A local coffee chain reached out, looking for a rebranding project. It was a big deal, too big for my tiny firm, but I said yes anyway. For weeks, I barely slept, pouring every ounce of creativity into the campaign. When it finally launched, it went viral. The client's sales tripled in a month, and suddenly, everyone wanted to work with Katie Ford Marketing. The emails started flooding in. Then came interviews, collaborations, sponsorships. I remember staring at my computer one night, watching the numbers climb, tears slipping down my cheeks. No one had clapped for me at that dinner table, but the world was clapping now. Still, I didn't tell my parents. Part of me wanted them to hear it from someone else, to realize that the daughter they'd pushed away had built something incredible without their help. And that's exactly what happened. I found out through a mutual friend that my name had come up at a local business conference my father attended. Someone had mentioned me during a keynote about successful female entrepreneurs in the state. My father had apparently gone silent. My mother later sent me a brief text. "We heard about your company. Hope you're doing well," that was it. No apology. No acknowledgement. Just a neutral statement wrapped in pride and discomfort. But I didn't need more. What I wanted wasn't their approval anymore. It was peace. One cold evening, about a year after that dinner, I sat by my window, staring at the apartment lights across the street, thinking about how far I'd come. The girl who once begged for her parents' validation was gone. In her place was a woman who had built something no one could take away. Still, deep inside, a part of me wanted closure. Not revenge, not confrontation, just a full-circle moment. Something poetic. Something that said, I made it. And life, it seems, was listening. Because just a few months later, a for sale sign appeared on a familiar street, the one I grew up on. I didn't hesitate. I called the agent, and when she told me the price, $1.2 million, I smiled. I could afford it now. I bought that house across the street from my parents without blinking. The day I signed the papers, I drove to the old neighborhood and parked outside, watching my father mow the lawn like nothing had ever changed. He didn't notice me. Madison's car was gone, and the windows looked tired, faded. The house that had once made me feel small now looked ordinary. But as I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, my heart pounded. Not from anger, but from triumph. Not the kind of triumph that shouts, but the kind that breathes deeply and says, "You were wrong about me." When I finally stepped into my new home, the one facing theirs, the echo of my footsteps felt like freedom. I ran my hand along the stair railing, the fresh paint, the sunlight spilling through tall windows. Every inch of it was a reminder. I had created this life. I had earned it, and soon they'd see just how much. When I first drove past the for sale sign in front of my parents' house, I didn't mean to stop, but fate has a funny way of daring you to face the ghosts you've outgrown. Across the street stood a newly listed mansion, sunlight glinting off its pale stone exterior like it was waiting for me. My chest tightened as I read the number on the sign, $1.2 million. A price tag that once would have felt impossible now felt poetic. My business had grown faster than I'd ever dreamed. Clients recommending clients, contracts doubling, investors reaching out. Late nights in that cramped apartment had finally paid off, and for the first time, I wasn't surviving. I was thriving. I parked my car, staring at the house until my reflection blurred in the window. The irony hit hard. Years ago, they told me to leave. Now I could buy the view from which they'd watched me walk away. I didn't plan to buy it out of spite, but as a declaration that I had built something solid on the ruins they left behind. When my offer went through, I didn't tell anyone, not even Eli, my younger brother, who'd always been the quiet witness to our family's chaos. The day I got the keys, I walked through every room, fingers tracing polished railings, marble counters, sunlight dancing across glass panes. Each echo of my footsteps sounded like a victory drum. This wasn't revenge, it was reclamation. The same girl they called too emotional had turned her pain into power, and every corner of that house would carry her story. The movers arrived 2 days later, unloading the life I'd built piece by piece. Among the boxes sat something I hadn't expected to see again: the dining table from my childhood home. I'd bought it at my parents' estate sale, the one they organized in a rush after Madison's latest failed business deal had left them drowning in debt. When the auctioneer called for bids, I raised my hand without hesitation. They stared at me from the porch, faces pale with disbelief, while I paid twice its value in cash. Now it sat in the middle of my new dining room, not as a relic of control, but a monument to survival. As I set the table, memories blurred with reality, my father's voice booming with disappointment, Madison's laughter dripping with entitlement, my mother's silence sharp enough to wound. I took a deep breath and whispered to the empty air, "Not anymore." That night, I sat alone at that same table, eating takeout straight from the container. No lectures, no judgment, just peace. The next morning, Eli showed up unannounced, backpack slung over one shoulder, his smile hesitant but genuine. "So it's true," he said, stepping inside. "You bought this place?" I nodded, watching him take it all in. "It's beautiful, Katie. Mom and Dad, they don't know what to say." "They'll find the words eventually," I replied, though part of me doubted they ever would. We walked through the house together, laughter bouncing off high ceilings, something light blooming between us for the first time. Growing up, he'd always been in Madison's shadow, overshadowed by her constant drama and our parents' misplaced praise. But here, he stood taller, eyes bright with pride. "You did this," he said quietly. "You really did." "We both did," I told him. "We just stopped waiting for their permission." That weekend, I decided to throw a housewarming party, a celebration not of wealth, but of freedom. Invitations went out to friends, colleagues, and clients who had supported me through the climb. I spent the morning arranging flowers, unpacking art, and choosing a dress that made me feel like the woman I'd fought to become. Every detail mattered because this night wasn't just for me. It was for the version of me who once cried herself to sleep in a cramped apartment, wondering if she'd made a mistake by walking away. As I lit the candles and checked the clock, a knock echoed through the hallway. Eli stood on the porch holding a potted plant, his grin wide. "You're early," I said, opening the door. "Thought you might need help." He stepped in, setting the plant down carefully. "Place looks amazing." I smiled, handing him a box of glassware. "Thanks for coming, Eli. It means more than you know." Together, we rearranged chairs and music filled the space, a soft hum of something new, belonging. "Remember when Dad asked where you saw yourself in 5 years?" he said, breaking the quiet. I laughed softly, remembering that awful dinner. "Yeah, and I said I wanted to build something that mattered." He rolled his eyes. "Well," Eli said, gesturing around, "I think you answered that question." His words landed deep, not as validation, but recognition. For the first time, someone in my family saw me, not as a disappointment, but as someone who'd built her own worth. The first guests arrived soon after. Chloe, my best friend from college, with her booming laugh and quick hugs. Marjorie, the realtor who'd sold me the house and become an unexpected friend. My business partners and clients who had watched me rise from nothing. The house buzzed with energy, filled with people who knew me not as the difficult daughter, but as the woman who'd made something out of heartbreak. "To new beginnings," Chloe toasted, clinking her glass against mine. "And to building your own house, literally and metaphorically." We laughed, glasses sparkling under the lights. For the first time in years, I wasn't performing for anyone's approval. Between conversations, I slipped away into my office to finish the scholarship paperwork I'd been drafting. A fund for students who came from difficult families but refused to give up on their dreams. My assistant had called earlier to confirm the first recipients. The thought of helping others find the freedom I'd fought for made my chest ache with purpose. As I signed the final page, a soft voice startled me. "Still working during your own party?" Eli leaned against the doorframe, amused. "Some habits die hard," I said, smiling. "But this one's worth it." He nodded, eyes shining. "You're changing lives, Katie. I hope they realize how lucky they are." His words lingered long after he walked away. The night deepened, laughter spilling into the garden, warm lights flickering through open windows. Then, just as I stepped out to join the others, headlights swept across the driveway. I turned, heart tightening as a familiar car pulled up across the street. My parents stepped out slowly, faces drawn, eyes scanning the house that once would have been their pride. Madison followed behind, her phone glued to her hand, the glow from the screen illuminating the frustration in her expression. A small U-Haul idled nearby. For a second, I couldn't breathe. They were moving out. Foreclosure, I realized. Their perfect facade had finally cracked. From my porch, I watched as they carried boxes toward their car, silent, avoiding each other's eyes. Madison glanced up and froze when she saw me. Across the street, two worlds collided, the one that had broken me and the one I'd built from its fragments. Slowly, I raised my hand in a small, polite wave. Not forgiveness, not revenge, just acknowledgement. She hesitated, then looked away. My father's shoulders sagged under the weight of everything he'd refused to understand. My mother didn't look at me at all. I turned back toward my home, the laughter of my guests wrapping around me like armor. I had no need for confrontation. The universe had already written the ending I could never have scripted better myself. Later that night, after everyone left and silence settled again, I stood at my bedroom window, staring out at the empty house across the street. The same street I'd once walked down in tears now shimmered under moonlight, calm and still. I thought of that night years ago, the slammed fists, the accusations, the humiliation, and I smiled. The room they'd taken from me had become the foundation for everything I now owned, everything I was. My business, my peace, my power. For the first time in my life, I slept without wondering if I was enough. I was more than enough, and though I didn't know it yet, my story wasn't done, because sometimes the past doesn't disappear quietly. Sometimes it shows up again when you least expect it. A week after my housewarming party, I thought the dust had finally settled. The mornings were quiet, the air smelled of jasmine from the front garden, and my life, for the first time, felt like it belonged entirely to me. But peace has a strange way of testing you. It never comes without ghosts. The first message arrived on a Thursday evening, an email with a familiar name in the sender line. Madison. My pulse spiked before I even opened it. The subject read, "Can we talk?" I stared at the screen for a long time, debating whether to click or delete. Curiosity won. Her words were short, hesitant, unlike the confident, polished tone she used online. "I know you probably don't want to hear from me. Things haven't been good. Mom and Dad are struggling and I can't handle it all alone. I need help." I read it twice, then leaned back in my chair, letting the irony sink in. The same sister who once laughed as I packed my things now wanted my help. I didn't reply immediately. I took a walk around the house, the sound of my footsteps echoing against hardwood floors, every step reminding me how far I'd come. But something inside me, the part that still remembered being the older sister who protected her even when it hurt, couldn't completely ignore it. The next day I called Eli. "She reached out," I said quietly. "Madison," he sighed. "I figured she would. They're losing everything, Katie. Dad's too proud to say it, but Mom's been crying every day." I closed my eyes, the ache returning like an old bruise. "What do I even say?" "Say whatever helps you sleep at night," Eli replied. "But don't lose yourself again." His words stayed with me. That evening, I drove across the street. Their once pristine lawn was now patchy, the shutters fading, the for sale sign leaning slightly in the dirt. Madison opened the door, her face thinner, her eyes rimmed with exhaustion. "You came," she said softly, stepping aside. The house felt smaller than I remembered. Empty rooms, dust on the furniture, silence heavy as guilt. My parents sat in the living room, surrounded by boxes, their pride packed away like fragile keepsakes. Mom looked up first, her voice barely above a whisper. "Katie," I nodded. "Hi." For a few moments, none of us spoke. Then Dad cleared his throat, his voice rough. "We didn't expect you." "You didn't expect me to buy a house across the street either," I said before I could stop myself. He flinched and a shadow passed over his face. "I suppose we deserved that." Madison sat on the edge of a chair, wringing her hands. I didn't come here to fight, I said finally. I came because you asked for help. She looked at me, eyes wide with something between gratitude and shame. I messed up, Katie. I thought success was about attention, followers, people cheering for you. But it's not. I watched you build something real and I thought I could fake my way there. Now I can't even pay my rent. The honesty in her voice surprised me. For the first time, I saw not the spoiled sister who took everything for granted, but a young woman who'd never learned how to stand on her own. You have to start somewhere, I said gently. It's not too late. Dad shifted in his chair, his pride crumbling. I was hard on you, he said slowly. Harder than I should have been. I thought pushing you would make you strong. I didn't see that you were already stronger than all of us. Mom nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. We were wrong, Katie, about so much. The apology I'd spent my whole life waiting for hung in the air, fragile but real. Part of me wanted to reject it, to remind them of the pain, the years of silence. But another part, quieter and wiser, knew this was closure, the final thread that needed to be tied. I'm not angry anymore, I said, and I meant it. But I can't fix everything for you. What I can do is help you learn to stand again. Madison blinked, confused. What do you mean? Come work with me, I said. Not as my sister, as an intern. Learn what real work feels like. If you're serious about changing, prove it. The room went still. Then slowly she nodded. Okay, I'll do it. Over the next few months, Madison showed up every morning at my office, early and quiet, dressed in simple clothes, no filters or followers to hide behind. She made mistakes, plenty of them, but she learned. She asked questions, took notes, stayed late. The same employees who once rolled their eyes at her name began to respect her. One afternoon, I found her helping a new hire troubleshoot a campaign issue, her tone patient and kind. When she caught me watching, she smiled, a real smile, the kind that didn't need an audience. Our parents eventually moved to a smaller house in a nearby town. We visited occasionally, but the dynamic had changed. Boundaries were firm, respect mutual. I didn't need their validation anymore, and somehow that made them treat me differently. Eli got accepted into his engineering program, the first in our family to pursue something purely out of passion, and watching him thrive was one of the proudest moments of my life. My company expanded nationwide, our scholarship fund supporting dozens of students who reminded me of the girl I used to be, scared but unbreakable. One evening, as I stood on my porch watching the sunset paint the sky gold, Madison joined me, holding 2 cups of coffee. You ever think about that night? She asked. The dinner? All the time, I said. But not with anger anymore. More like gratitude. If it hadn't happened, I'd still be trying to prove myself to people who never saw me. She nodded, looking across the street at the empty house that had once been our battlefield. You turned that pain into power, she said quietly. I wish I'd done it sooner. You're doing it now, I said, clinking my cup against hers. That's what matters. The wind rustled the trees, carrying the faint scent of home-cooked food from a neighbor's window. For a long moment we stood there in silence, 2 women who had finally grown out of their past. Later that night, I walked through my house, lights dim, candles flickering. The dining table, our old dining table, sat gleaming in the center of the room, the same place where I'd once been told to leave. Now it hosted board meetings, dinners, and moments of laughter. I traced my hand across its surface, the wood warm beneath my fingertips, and smiled. Every scar, every crack, every moment of humiliation had led me here. My story wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming what was mine. My voice, my peace, my worth. I thought about the younger version of me, the one who stood trembling in that room, suitcase in hand, unsure of what the world had waiting. If I could speak to her now, I'd tell her that sometimes being thrown out is the best way to find where you truly belong. The room they'd tried to take from me had become the foundation for the empire I built. One decision, one boundary, one act of self-respect at a time. As I turned off the lights and headed to bed, moonlight streamed through the window, soft and silver, bathing the room in calm. For the first time in forever, I felt entirely at peace, not because everything was perfect, but because I no longer needed it to be. The world outside kept moving, cars humming, distant laughter drifting through the air. I closed my eyes and smiled, knowing that the life I'd built wasn't defined by their choices anymore. It was defined by mine. Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and standing up for yourself? I learned that sometimes the greatest act of love isn't staying. It's walking away, rebuilding, and returning stronger than they ever imagined. And as I drifted to sleep that night, I realized something I'd been chasing my whole life had finally found me. Not their approval, not their apology, freedom.